With that said, I'd love to obviously chat more about your experience and I guess kind of what got you into and what started the whole dream, I suppose, of starting to produce and operate in the Broadway musical space.
Well, it's an interesting question because I was actually wondering how far back I should go. And if I really go back to the very beginning, before it was actually an investment in my eyes, it goes back about 25 years. Back then, I went to see what could have been my first musical production, like my first theatrical musical play of sorts. Wasn't in New York, it wasn't Broadway. It was actually in my hometown, but Phantom of the Opera was playing, and this was something relatively new to me. Outside of productions in high school and at university, this was the first real, true, large mainstream production that I went to, and I was blown away. I was blown away on multiple levels. The soundtrack of Phantom of the Opera and just how enveloping that musical production was. Incredible soundtrack by Andrew Lloyd Webber. And then, not really being familiar with, musicals and large plays, it was an incredible production with a great cast, great singers. If anybody's seen Phantom of the Opera, they know what I'm talking about. It's just jaw-dropping. It's inspiring. It's amazing. So I fell in love with live theater at that point in time, whether it be a play or a musical, similar but different. That's kind of when I first fell in love with it. And then just loosely over the years, I just go and see different types of shows. But, if you want to fast forward to what, we're invested in, what we are producing or co-producing, that came about, and this is an interesting story, that came about at one of the masterminds I belonged to. Unfortunately, that mastermind ended in December. They just decided to not renew and continue, the 4 partners in it. But it was one of the best masterminds I belonged to. Now the best mastermind is the one we have, which is, by the way, as a side note, part of Norada Capital Management. So it's part of our private equity firm here, and forms part of our portfolio, part of the foundation of what we offer. And that's called Power Room. It is a very, very much a 5-star high-end mastermind, more so in quality than in price, but it's not an inexpensive mastermind. But Power Room, for those who are curious about it, can go to powerroom.com. And just so you know, the website is good, but we're rebuilding a great website to replace it. I just don't know when it's going to come out. But you can see our future events there and attend, that mastermind. But I was at another mastermind, which, believe it or not, was actually a mastermind that played heavily into the creation of Power Room. We modeled a lot of what was going on at this other mastermind for our mastermind. But I was at this mastermind event, and there were probably 300 people in the room. We had almost 500, 600 members at that time. And I was sitting next to this individual named Ken. And, we're all entrepreneurs, business owners. We're focused on marketing and business development. That's the kind of the core theme of this mastermind. And we were talking about each other's businesses. And I told him about Norada Real Estate Investments and what we do and what we can offer and all that kind of stuff. And his jaw dropped and he said, "Man, where were you 5 years ago? I wanted to invest in real estate. I've been wanting to invest in real estate. I know I need the help. I need, someone to guide me and hold my hand and provide me the inventory and everything else that goes around it." And that's exactly what Norada Real Estate Investments does. So he said, let's stay in touch. I got to work with you because, I do need your services. Great. Then I got talking about, what do you do? And he goes, well, I don't remember how the conversation started or how it went, but what I do remember are the highlights. And he basically said, well, I'm a lead producer on Broadway. So I've been involved, directly and indirectly in about 30 different productions, from Kinky Boots to, many others, getting the band back together, all kinds of successful productions that have ran for years. And I thought, well, that's really cool. That's interesting. I mean, I was interested enough at that point to learn more about Ken. Then he told me, excuse me. He also told me that, for about a period of 4 or 5 years, he was the executive director for North America for Andrew Lloyd Webber, the guy who produced Phantom of the Opera, Cats, Jesus Christ Superstar, and a whole laundry list of incredible theatrical musicals that Andrew Lloyd Webber produced. Well, Andrew Lloyd Webber lives in London. That's, his home, but he's got, these theatrical productions going all over the country, or the world, actually. So his right-hand man in North America was Ken, basically employed by Andrew Lloyd Webber, but not exclusive. He basically still did his own productions and was a lead producer and involved in all these other productions. So that was all fascinating to me. And then he told me something that was the hook. Not that he was trying to sell me, but he said, I just negotiated the rights from Warner Brothers to produce the movie franchise Vacation with Chevy Chase into a Broadway musical. And he said the working title is Broadway Vacation. We've now that I'm a major co-producer in that production, we've renamed it to the Griswolds Broadway Vacation. But it's the Griswold family with, Uncle Eddie and, all the mishaps that happen to the Griswold family in their adventures wherever they go. Well, they happen to be going to New York, and this time it's Broadway, but to New York. And so it's basically everything that happens to the Broadway or to the Griswold family in the Big Apple. And I thought, that's really cool. That's very interesting. So I asked for more questions. He told me a little bit more. And he said, right now it's just in the development phase. Like we're still, getting to the point where we're going to start writing the screenplay, if you will. It's not a screenplay, but the script and writing the music and all that kind of stuff. He said, ultimately, we're going to be looking for investors to come in. And I said, well, definitely keep me in mind. I said, this is interesting and intriguing. And I might want to put my foot in the water, which means a personal investment. And that was my intention at the time, maybe 50,000, 100,000, just personally. Long story short, we stayed in touch. We got to know each other. We became friends. And he brought me into his world more and more and more, which I found incredibly interesting, fascinating. And I was educating myself on the investment side of it all. So I didn't come in as an investor ultimately. I came in as a co-producer. And there actually is a difference between investor and co-producer in theatrical productions. But long story short, I not only got involved with Broadway Vacation, I ended up getting involved in 4 or 5 other productions that Ken was involved in or leading the charge on as a lead producer. And I knew that I wasn't going to have enough capital to be able to make an investment in all of them, let alone enough in one. So I just decided at that time that I would just bring that category of investment, that asset class, if you will, into Norada Capital. And Sure. It doesn't make up a large percentage of our portfolio, like the foundation for Norada Capital. It's a relatively small slice of the pie. I don't have the number exactly in front of me. I want to say 12 to 15% of our pie. Definitely not more than 15%, but probably closer to 10. So it's in that range, but it's taken on a more significant role. But yeah, that's long story short. That's kind of how it all came to be.
Love it. Yeah, it's interesting too because, as you know about my background, my parents are both professional musicians. They're retired now. So I grew up, actually the first musical I ever saw was Phantom of the Opera. And wow. It was at a stage in Orono, Maine, where my dad was a music professor for 41 years. And, I fell in love with that as well. Yeah. Now I am curious from an investment perspective, right? And for our clients out there who invest in Norada Capital Management, when you put money or you invest capital into Norada Capital Management, and some of those dollars are going towards the building and the production of something like a Broadway musical or a theatrical production, what does that look like? What does it entail? Like, are you from hiring the cast to lighting and all these things? Like, what's the undertaking like to get a Broadway musical production off the ground?
Well, depending on the production, it could literally take as much as 2 to 3 years before it actually sees opening night. there'll be like workshops and performances. There'll be readings, and then ultimately workshops, and then ultimately when it's near completion, it'll be running in a regional theater somewhere, maybe locally, but it's not its official opening night. It might run for 4 to 6 weeks just to see what audience feedback and responses and whatnot, but it's not officially open. So that could take 1, 2, 3 years. So there's a lot that goes on. There's people you bring in. So obviously you have teams. You bring in a director. You bring in your writers. You bring in your your music lead and people who are going to be composing or writing and composing, and compiling or orchestrating the music. You'll have your choreographers. You'll have your casting director who will bring in the cast. It's just like a movie in many ways, like a movie production or a film production. You just have a whole slew of people, but it all starts with an idea and a seed investment, and an idea usually starts with a lead producer or a couple of people who are the general partners who ultimately are the lead producers. So that's kind of where it starts, but there's a whole long process. And then at some point, when the idea becomes a seed and that's planted, that's when you have the initial investment. Your seed capital is kind of like your founding round. And then that kind of leads to another round of funding where you assemble all the people you need, like the full team. And then maybe even the cast. You might even pick out the cast. And that leads to another round of funding where now you're really building out everything. So there might be multiple rounds of capital raising. Ultimately, you're going to raise anywhere from, on a low end, $3 to $5 million for a small production that doesn't have a very expensive set to build, to as much as 20, 25 million or more for a much larger set that is more intricate and involved. I don't know what the cost was on Hamilton. I did know, I forgot. But a more extravagant set can be $20 to $30 million. Mm-hmm. Very rare instances, it could be 50 million plus, depending on what it is. So they're not inexpensive. And before you even ask me the question, I'll kind of answer a new question. Sometimes you have to think about, what is the risk? Mm-hmm. Well, generally speaking, out of 10 theatrical productions, like musicals, like Broadway musicals, 7 out of 10 will not recoup their original capital from their investors. 2 out of 10 will recoup and then make some sort of profit, maybe low, maybe moderate, but will recoup and then continue to run with a certain rate of return. And then 1 out of 10 will knock it out of the park, and it'll be a Hamilton, a Wicked, a Beetlejuice, like a Phantom of the Opera, something that will just run for years and just be very profitable, and might spin off a touring cast, that visits different cities and has basically a road show, a production on stage in different cities. Some of them will have permanent shows, like, for example, A Beautiful Noise, the one we're doing with Neil Diamond. It's the Neil Diamond musical. So that's doing very, very well on Broadway. And now we are already looking at, and have already gone to see, a theater in London, to open up in London, one potentially in Australia. And we've also signed off on a 24-city tour starting in 2024. So it'll be the same production, but just going from city to city for X number of weeks in each city. Sure. And so, the parent company that launches that will benefit from these spin-offs, because there will essentially be what are like royalties that, come and flow back up to the original investors in that original production, because now they're getting royalties from other locations, whether it's a touring show or not. But as far as, risk goes, it is a higher risk investment. But one way to mitigate that risk is the analogy of betting on the jockey, not necessarily the horse. You want to keep both in mind. but the jockey, meaning the team involved, like the lead producers and their connections and network and the people that they can bring on, play in pretty heavily into the success of that production.
Yeah, and I think it's super unique. And the reason I asked that question is just to get some perspective for someone who's investing, right, and wants to know the actual, amount of work that goes into a broad musical production, right? It's not just, here's some seed capital off to the races. There's a ton of work that goes into it. So, when you brought up A Beautiful Noise, I imagine a ton of work went into that. And by the way, I just saw that on a couple weeks ago. The Beautiful Noise they were doing a couple songs on the Today Show, right?
Yeah.
So it was cool to see that get that publicity, right? Not every broad musical production gets publicity like that. So
well, that's another one of the keys to success that you need. You need to have the right team and the right people at the top, like the lead producers, like my partner Ken, who is always putting this out in front of the public eye in different ways, whether it's through print mediums like magazines and newspapers like the New York Times and whatever else, or on television and radio. And so we've been on pretty much everything now, from CBS Morning to the Today Show to the talk shows with I forgot their names, all those guys that do the Tonight Show and Jimmy Fallon. Who's the other guy?
James Corden, who I think probably he's retiring. So
yeah. So like we're there. We even got a great spot during was it the Rose Bowl parade, the major parade at the beginning of the year? I think it's January, February. But that major parade that's televised nationwide. Well, we literally had a full-on nationwide broadcast of, I think, 4 minutes, like 2 songs, with our cast singing and dancing in the middle of the parade, because they basically stop the parade and they run these intermissions, if you will. So, getting all of that kind of exposure is just part of the marketing strategy around these productions. And so, we push that hard, and that we're getting a lot of it, not just for A Beautiful Noise, but, a couple of our others that are running right now or about to run.
Sure. Yeah. And that's exciting. I mean, when clients ask, well, what's going on in the broad musical productions scenes, now you have an update, right? That's what part of your capital is going towards is the growth of that, that industry. So yeah. Anything else, Marco? What else are we missing? What can we update investors on?
Why don't we just, I got the list here in front of me on the side of the list, because I don't remember all of them necessarily in the order I want to remember them in. But, as far as the productions that we have going on or that are in production to be opened either this year or next, include A Beautiful Noise, which is running now. It opened up on December 4th of 2020, last year, 2022. That's the Neil Diamond musical, doing very, very, very well. We have the Griswolds Broadway Vacation, which we are still locating the right theater. So the timing and the theater are 2 critical pieces. You want to be in the right theater, and you want to open at the right time of year around other events, to help ensure success. So there's the Griswolds Broadway Vacation. We have one called Joy, based on the very successful Italian female entrepreneur Joy, who was the queen of, I think it's QVC. She has her own movie. She has her own book out, also called Joy, or a sub-derivative of Joy. So we have that one. Harmony is with Barry Manilow. And so that one's, it's online and it's going officially live soon. I don't know the date. The Notebook, which is based on the movie, The Notebook, and the book called Notebook. So that's a production. The Devil Wears Prada. So we are a 1/3 co-producer on that production. And that will, I don't have the date on that, but everybody's familiar with the movie, The Devil Wears Prada. Sure. So it's based on, obviously, that story. And then what's running right now, well, actually, before I get to that, the latest edition is one called Here Lies Love, which should be going, doing its 4 pre-opening run on July 17th. The theater is actually being built right now. I'll be in New York in a couple of weeks to go and tour. This has never been done before. They're actually rebuilding essentially the inside orchestra section, well, actually the entire theater of a very, very large theater. They're taking out the orchestra section and turning it into basically a dance floor with the stage. And so there's actually 4 sections that will be built. You can be part of the show on the dance floor, on the main stage. There are going to be interactive, kind of like, I don't know what they call them, like decks or tiers on the side, which are interactive, but you're not going to be, part of the dance part of it. And then the orchestra section has been moved up to the mezzanine level, and there's 2 levels up there. So there's actually 4 different areas. I have a great 2-minute video if anybody ever asks you for
Sure.
a sneak peek of the construction and design of it. It's pretty cool. So the guy who's actually designing this and building it out is the same guy who built the Hamilton stage and some other very famous, massive stages and productions. So we've got some really great people on that. 2 of the people who are behind this production are David Byrne, who was the lead singer for Talking Heads, and Fatboy Slim. So
no kidding.
yeah. So the music is written, composed, is written and composed by those 2 guys. But there's a lot more I could tell you about that production, but that should be pretty interesting. There's one called Pleasant Grove, which is coming out of Utah that we're moving over to Broadway next year. Last but not least, I don't think I missed one, but last but not least, and I left this last for a specific reason. It's called The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window. It was a famous play that ran decades ago, written by the history. If you look at the history about this, there's politics and all kinds of interesting things involved in it. It's a pretty big deal in terms of the storyline, and it's too much to get into here for this recording, trying to keep it short. But here's the cool thing about it. It's only a 10-week run. We're about almost halfway through the run. It got nominated for a Tony Award.
Wow.
And yeah, it's got nominated for a Tony Award. I think it has a pretty good shot to win the Tony Award. And I will be at the Tony Awards in 3 weeks, wearing my tux and black tie. Well, actually, it's not a black tie. It's a colored tie. But my tux. So hopefully, with any luck, knock on wood, we will actually get the award for the best revival of a play. And so that one's, yeah. So
Well, good. By the way, the colorful tie, that's definitely you. So
yeah, for sure.
I like that.
We'll make it very colorful.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. Yeah. So would you guys get to potentially, mingle with the cast and mingle with the groups that are there at the Tony Awards?
Oh yeah. We'll all be sitting in the theater. Like we'll all be there in
okay.
the hall, the theater. And should they call us, it's actually the above title producers that go on stage to receive the Tony. So that means that I would be going up on stage, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Never done that before. I don't know if it'll happen again, but given this, the success of what my colleagues and partners have done in the past on these new productions, there's probably a good chance that there'll be another opportunity. But yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I think we can wrap it up here. I just, I wanted to give some background and obviously some information more to our investors here at Nada Capital, and hopefully that was insightful. Gave you some more understanding of what goes on behind the scenes with Broad Musical Productions and with the investment. Anything to add, Marco?
No, just if you're in New York, if you live in New York, certainly go see our productions, Like a Beautiful Noise. But if you ever travel to New York, go to Manhattan, go to Broadway, and go enjoy one or more of these shows. I mean, they're phenomenal. It's a lot of fun. Theater's just great.
Love it. All right, sir. Well, thank you, Marco, as always. And to our Narada investors, be well.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks.